Wow. Mm-hmm. Welcome to part 2. Before I get started on what I should more properly be talking about, I cannot resist a little diversion just to annoy my videotaper, who thinks he's taping one thing and he's now going to find he's taping another. But whose benefit is this for anyway? As I was listening to Yanthi this afternoon talking about talking to the various extracts that she had culled from her copious reading, she was talking to us about the nature of the one reality and mentioning, with suitable warnings, that all that we see is unreal. And however many times she warned us that this is not the sort of unreal in the sense that we can walk safely in front of cars and not get run over, nonetheless, one perhaps is still left with potential misconceptions as to the nature of this unreality. And I was reminded of the dreadful fallacy that you could be left with in thinking that seeing as all is impermanent and all will return to the one, Brahman, however you wish to express it, so you might fall into the thinking, well, what's the point of the whole thing? Why bother? Why bother? And it could be argued, and from one point of view I think it is indeed argued, that the work of the Buddha was indeed just such a movement of reformation to try and correct such attitudes of mind. And I was reminded of a passage from the Mahatma Letters, which I thought I would share with you because it came to mind while Yanthi was talking, where exactly the same discussion arises. And perhaps it might be fruitful just to listen to this just for a moment. It's absolutely nothing to do with what I was supposed to be talking about, you understand. It comes from letter 23. And letter 23 consists of a series of questions which Sinnett had jotted down, and in his copious free time the Mahatma gave him some answers to these. One of these questions deals with this matter that I've just been outlining for you. Sinnett says, closely allied to this question, that's the previous question he had asked, closely allied to this question would be another often put, and this is in quotes, so this is what Sinnett imagines his questioners might ask. What is the good of the whole cyclic process if spirit only emerges at the end of all things, pure and impersonal as it was first before its descent into matter? And then Sinnett says, gives his reply, my answer is that I am not at present engaged in excusing, but in investigating the operations of nature. In other words, what a cop-out. This is a beautiful way of saying, I don't know, but not here to excuse it, and just to tell you what it does. But perhaps, he says, there may be a better answer available. So the Mahatma does indeed give him an answer to this. And the answer comes in 2 parts. And I'd like to read you short extracts. It's a very long answer, in fact, but goes on for nearly 2 pages, but just a couple of extracts from it. So this is his reply to that question. He starts, the Mahatma starts, what emerges at the end of all things is not only, in quotes, pure and impersonal spirit, but the collective personal remembrances skimmed off every new 5th principle in the long series of being. The 5th principle, of course, is manas, so that's your whole experience as living, thinking, intelligent beings. So that's his first answer. It's not only pure and impersonal spirit, but also the experience skimmed off it. But then he gives a rather more fundamental answer as a paragraph later on. He goes on to qualify what I've just said, but that for the moment I'll pass over. He goes on in the second paragraph, but what is spirit? What is spirit, pure and impersonal per se? Is it possible that you should not have realized yet our meaning? Why? Such a spirit is a non-entity, a pure abstraction, an absolute blank to our senses, even to the most spiritual. It becomes something only in union with matter. Hence, it is always something, since matter is infinite and indestructible, and non-existent without spirit, which, in matter, is life. Separated from matter, it becomes the absolute negation of life and being, whereas matter is inseparable from it. There's a long qualification which goes on after that, but that first part, I think, is absolutely fundamental that we should grasp. To suggest that at the end of the whole cycle, everything will return to pure spirit and nothing else is to miss the whole point of the whole process.
Was all that in letter 23,
Mm-hmm.
Adam?
Mm-hmm.
Even the answer.
Yes, even the answer. 23 is a part A and a part B, and there is a whole series of questions in part A and a whole series of replies in part B. So that is an absolutely fundamental answer which they're giving there. The experience, which he says skimmed off all the fifth principles, which is after all what the good of the whole process is as far as we're concerned, what we learn out of it is not lost, can never be lost. And however we may picture to ourselves the end of the cycle, the long pralaya or mahapralaya, that is not lost. And seeing as this is the week for introducing to new words, it's not a new word, but it's one with which you perhaps will not be familiar. We have been saying all week that the process, that cosmos is a process. Well, here's a new word for you. It is a heuristic process. Heuristic, the property or the characteristic of learning from experience.
Is the third letter an A or a U?
It's a U. I'm sorry, it's all supposed to be all capitals. My writing is not of the best. Learning by trial and error, learning by experience. So this is the whole process that as it rolls on is learning as it goes along, and the results of the experience is part of the continuing rolling process.
It becomes the seed, the shisters for the next.
Indeed, indeed. And all of the experience that we have so painfully learned by trial and error is carried forward. Skimmed off, yes, it's nice, isn't it?
The cream has come to the top, and
right.
That's all that really is,
right.
Is of value.
Yes.
Well, that's an extension of the David Chanic idea.
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm. It's the accumulation of all the David Chanics.
Yes, but raised to the nth degree, you might say. However far you may take this, always the same will apply, that the experience will always be integral to the process.
Yeah.
You can never separate off pure spirit and leave it as pure and impersonal at the end of the whole process. The experience is integral to the process.
You mean, although we're not permanent and we don't exist and we're not real, still something happens.
Right, and that is, you may say that the very process of change is permanent. If there's one thing which is permanent, it's the fact that change and accumulating experience is maintained.
Changingness is real.
Yes.
I have uttered that there is this business of accumulating experience, and people have denied the possibility of it because all the vehicles would disappear.
It's a fundamental misconception, in my view, to say that. I don't understand, I probably cannot even conceive of what the state of cosmos is in the final indrawing at the end of the Mahapralaya, but whatever that state of indrawing is, still innate in it is this experience. I couldn't say how it is. It is quite beyond me to say, but it is so.
Every manifestation of a cosmos or something would be exactly the same as one before.
Indeed.
If you had another one.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, you would never have had a first one in the first place, would you?
This use of the word paranishpana, the state of perfection, to which all things attain at the end of a cycle. Then she says it is absolute only in a relative sense.
Indeed.
What's that? These quoting, do you know?
Yancy,
Are you
that was
looking at
HPV.
something? You remembered that, did you? Do you know what you're quoting?
I produced it. I didn't knock it out of the air.
I want to know where we can see it in the page.
Yes, Paranishpana is in the early part of the SD. I can't give you the exact page without notice of the question, but you'll remember it's probably in the very first stanza.
Oh, we've had it with joy then.
In Paranishpana, which meant, and then she defines it when she gets down to that sloka about it, as the state of perfection which is reached by everything.
It's one of the early stanzas.
Yes,
It's not the first, the
Oh, yes,
second.
it's in the first stanza.
First stanza.
Yes.
Right. We now move on. As my boss would say, we now move down from the big picture to the dreary detail. So, part two, which starts with section 8 in the book, is what we're going to start by looking at this afternoon. As it happens, in the way in which this is going, section 8 does present a little recapitulation of what we have been looking at in the earlier sections. This was pointed out to me, I think, by Muriel. It hadn't actually occurred to me that that this was so, but when I looked again from the perspective of the way we have been studying this, it is indeed so. And therefore, for those of you who are new to the school this week, it will perhaps work as a slight recapitulation. The rebirth of the planet. This is the furthest back that we choose to go, I choose to go, in understanding this cyclic process which leads up to man as we encounter him today. We could go further back, ever increasing the span of our vision, but I'm not convinced that there is much purpose. So we stick to the planet, the environment in and on which we evolve. So the rebirth of the planet then is the starting point for this particular story. Hence my rather flippant title for this, The Story So Far, which is intended to lead from that point to where we are today. Taking the numbered paragraphs then in turn, this should act in way of summary and should chime well with what Geoffrey has been telling us, and will recapitulate some of the diagrams that he has already presented. I'd like you to look, if you will, either at Geoffrey's diagram or on page 172, volume 1, Secret Doctrine, which is diagram 2, which depicts this process of the rebirth of the planetary chain. 172 in volume 1. And there in simple diagram is shown to you the process. We've talked of the planet reincarnating or being re-embodied 7 times within the lifespan of the solar system itself, and here are 2 such stages. Whether ours is the 4th or the 5th, as we have discussed previously, is an open question for you to mull over. All that we need concern ourselves with is that the Earth chain, our globe included, has been formed out of causes, has been rooted in causes which can be traced back to a previous embodiment of this same being, the planetary chain. As explained in 8.1 and the extracts which I've given you, which amplify this, which are, if you wish to look at them, on page 93 in your book, it points out that in the 7th planetary round of the previous chain, as the kingdoms leave the first globe, A, for the last and 7th and last time, that globe, instead of merely falling into a state of rest, now begins to die. Its indwelling life principles now move on. Just as at the end of our incarnation, after the 7 phases of our personal existence, so the indwelling principles, the higher principles in man, move on, leaving behind the physical body to die and to disintegrate. So with the planet. So its inner principles also leave, cease to activate that particular form, and in the fullness of time, its body too will disintegrate. Those inner principles we have discussed. You remember that we said that every globe is the expression of an indwelling planetary spirit. So when we say its principles move on, then it's really what we're looking at is the planetary spirit, or indeed the hierarchy of lives which that planetary spirit symbolize. So A then has been left behind for the last and 7th time, and the form, the body of the planet now begins to disintegrate. And that process of disintegration clearly takes a very long time. The same will now happen successively and in turn on each of the other 6 globes. So the same is true of B. As, having left A for the last time, the kingdoms are now doing their last evolutionary stages on B and eventually leave that behind, and then B in turn begins to die. And so with C and through to G. As each dies, then the little dotted line that you see in the diagram comes into effect, and the life principles are transferred. Do not think of this in any spatial sense. Although she has drawn a dotted line, we should not think of the inner principles moving anywhere. Where do your principles move to when you go into Devachan and when you reincarnate? Well, they don't go anywhere, do they? It's a change of state, a change of consciousness, a change of condition. But they're not going anywhere in any dimensional spatial sense, any more than they are when they form or inform the new globe. Now, these principles then form, as she says and is discussed in 8.2, paragraph 8.2, a new laya center. Well, Joy has discussed with you the question of laya centers, and that is really why you found some information on this earlier in this book, although I didn't cover it because Joy had done so more than adequately. The laya center then is this dimensionless point or state around and through which, however you wish to phrase this, the formation of the new globe commences. What it really represents, I suppose, is the ideation of the indwelling planetary spirit. Again, this synthesis of the lives, the hierarchies which represent it. It acts as the focus then around which the formation of the new globe can and will occur. It's not spatial, we're never going to locate this. It is a point for creative purposes or formative purposes more than anything else. It represents the boundary, perhaps, between the inner formless worlds, the divine and formless worlds of spirit, as she calls it in one place, and the worlds of form wherein the globe will appear. It has demarked the area in which the manifestation will now occur. It has demarked, you may say, the ring pass knot within which the manifestation will now happen. But as yet, there is nothing. Between the death of the globe A of the lunar chain and the birth of globe A of the terrene or earth chain, there is a period of planetary pralaya, wherein the kingdoms of nature, all 7 kingdoms of nature, are undergoing their planetary rest, digesting the experience of the vast period of activity that they have previously undergone, assimilating and absorbing that, incorporating it into the very fabric of their being. When comes the dawn of the planetary Manvantara, around this nucleus of the laya center, within the area of the ring pass knot, now arrive the new waves of the kingdoms of nature. First to arrive, as is outlined in the paragraph 8.3, section 8.3 in your notes, is the elemental kingdoms. Seeing their nature is to us subjective, we have no way of seeing them with our currently